The old house creaked under the weight of silence. Its wooden beams, aged by time and the unrelenting passage of seasons, groaned as the wind outside pushed relentlessly against the walls. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of old wood and dust. The only sound that filled the room was the slow ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner, its rhythmic tick-tock breaking the stillness, but never quite enough to bring comfort. Tom stood by the window, looking out into the darkness. The rain had started to fall just as night began to settle in, a heavy downpour that blurred the outlines of the trees in the distance. He could barely see anything beyond the glass, but he didn't need to. He had lived in this house for years, but tonight felt different. He couldn't explain it, but the sensation gnawed at him like an itch he couldn't scratch. Behind him, a figure stirred. His brother, Mark, sat at the kitchen table, his hands gripping a mug of tea so tightly his knuckles were pale. Mark's face was gaunt, the hollowed-out expression of someone who hadn't slept in days. The darkness under his eyes only added to the eerie stillness of the room. Tom glanced at him, then turned back to the window, feeling the unease crawl deeper into his bones. "What's wrong with you, Mark?" Tom asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Mark didn't answer immediately. He just stared at the table, his eyes darting back and forth as though something invisible were moving just beyond the edge of his vision. Tom had known his brother for a lifetime, and he had never seen him like this. It was as if Mark wasn't really there, as if something or someone was pulling him away. I don't know," Mark muttered finally, his voice thin. I feel like there's something wrong here, something I can't see, something I can't explain." Tom frowned, the hairs on the back of his neck beginning to rise. "It's just the storm. It'll pass." But Mark shook his head, his eyes wide and frantic. "No, it's not the storm. It's something else. Something in this house. Something that's been waiting. Something that's tied to us." A cold shiver ran down Tom's spine. He turned away from the window, walking slowly toward his brother. "What are you talking about?" Mark lifted his gaze, and for the first time Tom saw a flicker of fear in his brother's eyes. A fear that was so raw, so real, it made his stomach churn. "Tell me it's not true, Tom. Tell me it's not true that we—" The words died on Mark's lips as the lights in the room flickered once, twice, and then went out, plunging them into complete darkness. The silence that followed was suffocating. Tom's breath caught in his throat as he reached out blindly, his hand finding Mark's shoulder in the pitch-black room. "Mark?" he asked, his voice trembling now. "What aren't you telling me?" Mark's voice came again, faint and strained. "We're not just brothers, Tom. We're bound by blood, but not in the way we thought." Before Tom could respond, a sudden gust of wind howled outside, rattling the windows. The house seemed to shake with the force of it. And then, a whisper, barely audible but unmistakable. It came from behind them, a voice that seemed to crawl up from the depths of the earth. "Blood. Brothers." Tom spun around, but there was nothing there, just the oppressive dark. The silence returned, but it was heavier now, filled with an unspoken presence. His heart raced. "Who's there?" The air grew colder, a chill seeping into his skin, deep into his bones. Mark was shaking, his hands trembling violently as he clutched the edge of the table. His lips were moving as though he was speaking to someone only he could see. "It's coming for us, Tom," Mark whispered, his voice breaking. "It's been here, in the house all along. And now it wants what's ours." The wind howled again, louder this time, almost deafening. And in that moment, the floorboards beneath their feet groaned, a heavy creaking sound that came from deep within the house, as if something enormous was shifting in the darkness. "You cannot escape." The voice seemed to come from every direction at once. Tom spun, his eyes darting wildly, but there was no one there, only the empty house. Yet the air felt thick, oppressive, and the shadows seemed to move, stretching, twisting, almost alive. "No," Mark's voice broke again, full of dread. "It's not a curse. It's something else. It's us." Tom's head snapped back toward him. "What are you saying?" Mark stood up suddenly, knocking over the mug in the process. Tea spilled across the floor, but Mark didn't seem to notice. His eyes were wide, fixed on something beyond Tom, something that seemed to pull him toward the shadows at the far end of the room. "They've been waiting," Mark said, his voice hollow, the words trembling with a kind of inevitability. "They've been waiting for us, for this."